Hello and welcome to the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary for June 2022. I'm Annie Haycock from the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, here to share some of the birding highlights of the month. June weather stayed unsettled, dull and relatively dry. This didn't stop the northward wader migration, and it's nice to see some of them in full summer plumage, such as this sanderling at Broadhaven South and a grey plover at the Gann. There was also a breeding plumage curlew sandpiper on the Teivi on the 4th, but it wasn't photographed. But they aren't all colourful. This petrel sandpiper dropped into Skocombe North Pond on the afternoon of the 2nd. It was the 7th spring record for the island and within the normal date range of the 13th of May to the 10th of June. This species shouldn't be anywhere near Britain, yet sightings are becoming more frequent in recent years. The only other rarity this month was a grey-headed wagtail on Skoma on the 6th. This subspecies of yellow wagtail breeds in Scandinavia and northwest Siberia and hasn't been recorded in Pembrokeshire since the 1990s. Then came another surprise migrant, a snow bunting on Skocombe on the 9th. The last June record was on the 5th in 1959. Even April and May records are pretty scarce. Skocombe seems an odd detour between the summer and winter sites for this species. This common rosefinch, ringed on Skocombe in May last year, provides a story of good luck and bad luck. The good luck is a ringed bird being found again. Although only a small percentage of ringed birds are seen again, they provide invaluable information about the movements of the species. This one was found in County Cork in Ireland this June. The bad luck side of the story is that it was caught by a cat, rescued by the cat owner, but then flew into a window and died. On June the 7th, an adult herring gull wearing white ring number 2PH was seen on the Teivi. It had been ringed as a sub-adult in March 2004 at a Gloucester landfill site, where it wintered until 2010. It wasn't seen again until the late Sam Baxter recorded it on the Nevern in July 2018. This latest sighting suggests it could be breeding somewhere along the North Pembrokeshire coast. Most of the ringed oyster catchers seen in Pembrokeshire were actually ringed here, so it's a nice change to find one that was ringed elsewhere. Dave Aston saw yellow X4 regularly at the Gann in April to June 2021. It made at least one brief visit to Skocombe that year before disappearing back to Ireland, where it had been ringed in Dublin in January 2020. After being seen several times in Ireland between August and February, it was back at the Gann in April to May 2022, and this time paid a visit to Skoma. So, could it be breeding somewhere in Pembrokeshire? It's worth keeping a lookout for an oyster catcher with yellow rings, even if you can't read the actual letters and numbers on it. The first chough chicks were fledging at one site on Castlemartin Coast on the 3rd of June, slightly earlier than usual, but this was not the earliest fledging date recorded at Castlemartin. In some years they've been recorded on the 1st or 2nd of June. This colour-ringed female is now in her 18th year, and she appears to have bred successfully in most of those years. A few weeks ago they seemed to be incubating eggs, but now are hanging around at a loose end, so it's likely that this breeding season has probably recently ended in failure. Goosanders were first recorded nesting in Wales in 1970, so it's not surprising that they should do so here sooner or later. They've been recorded in summer a couple of times on the Nevern and more recently on the Teivi. However, this year there was a sighting of a female goosander with 2 flightless chicks, perhaps about 10 days old, on the Teivi. They had probably nested upstream in Kilgarran Gorge, but whether on the Ceredigion or Pembrokeshire side we shall probably never know. Nightjars are not a common sight or sound in Pembrokeshire, just 1 or 2 birds recorded on migration every few years. However, one was heard churring in Tireg in June 2021, and this year there were 3 or maybe 4 nightjars heard and seen there on at least 3 nights in the middle of the month. But there are still no proven breeding records in the county since the 1970s. At least 1 cattle egret was still around, but no evidence of breeding anywhere. They can be surprisingly secretive when breeding in small numbers, so it's always worth keeping an eye out for them. On June the 6th, the Bonksy flew past Stromble Head, apparently heading west. 2 days later, another was photographed at Littlehaven, apparently heading south. Does that mean that autumn migration has begun already? Or were these birds just going south early, having lost their mates to the bird flu that was devastating skua colonies in the north? Over the last few decades, there have been very few summer records, with the main migration period starting in the middle of July. This graph uses data from BirdTrack and includes the meticulous record keeping of the Lake Graham Reese. Late May to early June is the main period for seabird counts, as most species are still incubating eggs or feeding small chicks early in the month, and therefore numbers of birds are relatively stable. While the devastating effect of avian flu has been dominating the news in seabird colonies further north, it has not yet reached Wales, so we'll enjoy the good news here while we can. A 2022 average total of 5,500 guillemots on breeding ledges is the highest seen on Skocombe since recording began in 1928. These counts of individuals potentially include incubating adults, some of their partners, plus failed breeders, non-breeding adults, and younger birds yet to pair. A correction factor is thus sometimes adopted to convert the count to an estimate of breeding pairs. After applying this correction factor, calculated to be 0.64 on Skocombe, the actual breeding population here is predicted to be in the region of 3,695 pairs. This is a new high. We also have great razorbill news. 3,936 adults on ledges is the most ever counted on Skocombe, and about 4 times the average count for 1970 to 2010. Estimating the number of puffins breeding on the islands is more difficult because they breed out of sight in burrows. Counts of birds on and around the islands are made early in the spring, before incubation starts, so most birds should be visible either on land near the burrows or rafting on the water below. These counts give an idea of how the population is doing, and it would seem that on Skocombe at least it's doing very well. Towards the end of June, the pufflings are still looking fluffy and cute, while the razorbills and guillemots seem much more advanced. The earliest razorbills have already left the cliffs, while the pufflings will remain safe down their burrows for another month or so. Not all birds have reached the chick stage. Storm petrels are probably the latest of the seabirds to get around to laying eggs, and here is one doing just that at the petrel station on Skocombe. This is probably the first time the process has been filmed. And if it looks like hard work, it's the equivalent of a human giving birth to a 10-kilogram baby. Many thanks to Chris Payne and the Eco1pro team for allowing me to use it here. Counts of seabirds are also made away from the islands. The breeding gull population along the Castle Martin Peninsula has shown another large decline this year. Although the herring gull population is not especially large, compared with last year's counts, the total number of apparently occupied nests on the cliffs is down by 37% this year. The much smaller, lesser blackback gull population has halved compared with last year. In contrast, our minimum estimates of the numbers of herring gulls breeding on industrial estate roofs around Pembroke Dock this spring, those that can be viewed anyway, suggest an increase of at least 24% since 2019 when we last counted them, and the number of breeding lesser blackback gulls has increased by 29%. Perhaps these rooftops, plus the lure of discarded delicacies at Tesco's, McDonald's and now also KFC, are providing them with better nest site options and food resources in the breeding season. By the end of the month, it was clear that the southward migration was getting underway. Sandwich and common terns and black-headed gulls were back on the Tyvee high tide roosts, and starlings, which start to form small flocks as fledglings become independent, suddenly formed a large roost of 500 on the Tyvee Marshes reed bed. A sign of things to come for next month. Well, that was a quick reminder of June 2022. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll look out for the next edition.